More evidence of the nature of the new world order that we're now entering. On the day after Trump won the US presidential election, Russian state television host Vladimir Solovyov predicted that Trump would simply blackmail Ukraine into going along with his preferred solution by getting Elon Musk to cut off access to Starlink while ceasing all US aid and data support. That was then. Today, according to Reuters, the US has threatened Ukraine's President Zelensky that Elon Musk's SpaceX will remove its access to the Starlink satellite internet system unless he signs the minerals deal that Trump is demanding he agrees to. Starlink, you'll recall, provides crucial internet connectivity with Ukraine's military, which was essential when Russia brought down other forms of land-based connectivity early in the war. According to one of three sources that spoke to Reuters, Ukraine runs on Starlink. They consider it their North Star. Losing Starlink would be a massive blow. Melinda Herring, a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council, told Reuters that Ukraine was now at one-to-one parity with Russia in terms of drone usage and artillery shells, but Starlink connectivity has been crucial in enabling the operation of those drones. The threat was reportedly first made after President Zelensky first turned down the initial proposal on the country's mineral wealth a couple of weeks ago when it was put by the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. We didn't talk about that at the time, but it was notable that Scott Bessent was the first visitor to Ukraine from the administration, not the Defense Secretary, not the Secretary of State. Once the news about the proposed deal broke, it became clear why that had been. Bessent had gone in first with their draft deal and reportedly tried to get Zelensky to sign it there and then, sort of in the way that disreputable door-to-door salesmen do. Get the commitment quick before they have time to think about those pesky details. Zelensky didn't do that, of course, and the consequences of that first version quickly became apparent on reflection. The threat over Starlink was apparently brought up again during meetings between the US Special Ukraine Envoy Keith Kellogg and Zelensky last week. During the meeting, Ukraine was told it faced imminent shut-off of the service if it didn't reach a deal on critical minerals. It's not recorded if the actual words were spoken. Nice communications network you got there. Shame if something happened to it. I expect it ever turned into a movie in future decades. Something like that will definitely be in the script. At the point of shooting this video, it seems as though Ukraine and the US are working on a revised deal, which Zelensky has been making optimistic noises about. So the original deal posited something like $500 billion in mineral wealth from Ukraine to the US, massively more than the support actually given by the US to Ukraine. It would sign over a full 50% of all minerals and revenues from extraction without offering any specific security guarantees for the future. Zelensky's social media comments, without going into detail, suggested that a revised deal that addressed some of Ukraine's problems with that first draft was now being worked on, and he hoped would deliver benefits to both sides. You know, like deals are supposed to do. But how much of this is that the US has recognised valid concerns with its first draft, and how much is that the threat of the removal of Starlink is forcing Zelensky to accept an exploitative deal on pain of his country's destruction? We have no way yet of being able to judge. At the point of shooting this video, news was confused, with some saying Zelensky was about to sign, some saying that he wasn't because it was still one-sided. It's not as though there's been any pretense that this is a negotiation of equals. Trump's turning against Zelensky the minute he turned down the original exploitative demands, and the naked use of these threats to push a retreat. These are not negotiation tools for someone looking to strike a mutually beneficial deal. Ukraine, after all, first suggested some kind of deal over resources, knowing that this was the sort of thing that Trump would value. They were keen to look at how they could both get mutual value from that sort of arrangement. They were just shocked when the US then turned round and said, well, give us a lot more and for nothing in return. But that's the difference between the old world order of allies based on mutual values and genuine friendship, where foreign diplomacy was traditionally about creating human relationships, and mafia family deals, where you're made offers you can't refuse. And foreign diplomacy is about choosing which empire to embrace in return for protection from a slightly less bad empire on the other side, at a cost that you know you're just going to have to live with. So, what are we to make of all of this? Firstly, I would expect a number of countries will now ban Starlink as a threat to their security. I mean, in whatever world order we live in, actions have consequences still. Having seen it be offered to a country in need, as it was when Russia first invaded Ukraine, then to become essential over time, and then have that dependency used as a weapon to make you capitulate to demands you sign over your national assets. In the might makes right world, you can do that. And you can argue there's no point moralising about it, any more than there would have been about, I don't know, tut-tutting about the rape and pillage that was the norm in the time of Genghis Khan. But most of us were brought up in the old world still, and we still think that this is a total douchebag move. Saying that you need to understand the rules of a new world doesn't mean that you can't think that it isn't a scumbag thing to do to a country just trying to survive. But even once that emotion has died away, on a purely pragmatic basis, a lot of countries will not want to repeat the mistake of relying on Elon Musk to provide anything that is essential to their national security. I dare say people will whine about it when those countries say that, and they will call them all sorts of names, but you reap what you sow. By the way, it's worth noting that Taiwan already saw this one coming and has kept away from Starlink in its search for secure internet connectivity. One senior Taiwan official told the Wall Street Journal that concerns about Elon Musk's business interests in China, as well as his political comments where he recently said that Taiwan was China's equivalent to Hawaii. These meant that his service couldn't be trusted. Well, they weren't wrong, we now discover. So that's number one. Number two is, what impact, if any, will this have on the shape of any final peace deal? As far as we know, Vladimir Putin is still fixed on achieving his maximalist goals in Ukraine. It is clear to say that no deal on minerals is going to mean that the US steps in to add its own military forces to the fight against Russia. It might mean, conceivably, that the US commits to continue giving support in the short term, bearing in mind that this is now a transaction for which recompense is built in, which wasn't in the first deal. Maybe it is in the revised one. But there's no suggestion that it will ramp that support up substantially in a way that would change the balance of events. So there's nothing in signing this deal that delivers added weight in pushing Russia back, even just stabilising on the existing borders. Since the discussions with Trump administration started, Russia has been upping its assaults in Ukraine, clearly seeing an advantage in pressing ahead as much as possible in the short term, before any substantive negotiations get underway. The firm prediction you can make about the revised deal, therefore, on minerals is that it won't promise anything that will actually predetermine or constrain the shape of a final peace deal, as it might be agreed between Trump and Putin. Also, given Trump's readiness to throw away previous agreements, including ones that he signed himself, you have to ask whether Ukraine gets anything of value from this at all. Suppose Trump and Putin meet, and at that meeting, Putin says to him, of course, once Russia has taken full ownership of Ukraine, Trump can still have access to those minerals. Indeed, he might say he'll have easy access to them if Russia wins, but Russia will target them and make them harder to recover if it doesn't. Or that he can have access to the minerals in the Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine if Russia wins. But obviously they would not be included in the Ukraine deal because Ukraine can't deliver those resources. It may be that would be enough to make Trump go back on the deal. Maybe, but it wouldn't. If you were a Ukrainian president, would you bet your country's future on that one question? Unless, of course, the blackmail you were facing with the threat of removing Starlink was such that you felt you had no choice. Of course, Putin might just say Ukraine isn't a proper country anyway, and therefore any deal they sign is null and void as far as he's concerned, and other things that Russia has to offer to America in return for America's total betrayal of Ukraine will still make it worth Trump's while. In other words, anything remains possible. While the cost of this deal is likely to be extraordinarily high for Ukraine, even, I expect in the second version, it won't change the actual outcome. All right. By the way, one commenter on this channel asked, so is this just a Ukraine channel now? The answer to that is no, but I've been talking predominantly about the ways that the world order is radically changing as a consequence of Trump 2.0. And, the biggest concrete shift is happening at the moment in this space, and quite a lot is happening day to day. So we will continue to talk about the things that are substantially important to the world we live in.